CSS is one of the most frustrating things about web development. It stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's that first word cascading that causes a lot of the trouble people have. CSS makes it very easy to add more and more layers of styling onto an element, each overriding the one before it. And that makes it very easy to create one big enormous mess of styles where you never really know which one is going to be applied. The way to tame CSS and to make it work for you is to keep it as simple as you possibly can. So that's one class per element if you can, and one or two places in the CSS that are styling that class. In this video, I'm going to show you how keeping things simple can help you solve one of the most regularly Googled questions on the topic of CSS. And that's, how do I center something inside an element? Putting a thing in the center of its parent thing in CSS is an extremely commonly searched problem. There's even a website, howtocenterthingsincss.com, that asks you to enter all these criteria, and then it decides the best CSS styles for you based on these criteria. And the reason it's complicated is because there's multiple different ways you can do it, and the best approach has evolved over time. This is why this website is asking which version of Internet Explorer you want to support. Because if you want your CSS to work on older browsers, like Internet Explorer, then you need to follow the best approach that was available at the time that these browsers were out. As of 2022, the best and most widely agreed upon method for centering an element on CSS is to use something called Flexbox. Flexbox is a layout model that treats your HTML elements as flexible boxes that can stretch in both directions to fill up their parent. According to caniuse.com, you can use Flexbox on over 99% of browsers that are in the world wide. So although it doesn't have 100% support, it's close enough. Getting your styles to work for that remaining less than 1% of your users will most likely create so much work that it just isn't worth the payoff you'll get from supporting those users. I mean, this is a product decision, not an engineering decision, but depending on who you're building your software for, it's very likely that your company will be fine with this level of browser support. So back to Flexbox. You use Flexbox by putting display flex on the parent element, and then you use the flex hyphen whatever properties on the child elements. Flexbox always has these two levels it interacts with, one parent and multiple children. And the children are always whatever elements come directly underneath the parent. Here's an example of some HTML. In this case, we have a parent UL element, and then these li list item elements are the children. The span in here is not part of our Flexbox layout because it's the child of this li element, and so it's not a direct child of the list. You could also have child elements of different types like this. In this case, Flexbox doesn't care whether it's a div or a section or an aside or anything like that, it will still work. One thing to note here is that even though the span tag here by default has a display property of inline, because we have it inside a Flexbox container, Flexbox will render this as display block. So the display property of the children in Flexbox is largely ignored in your CSS, and they will be display block and controlled by the Flexbox layout model. So now let's try to answer the question and the title of this video. How do we center these child elements inside of their parent? Well, the answer is with two properties: justify content and align items. Justify content controls how Flexbox will spread out your items along the main axis. So by default, that's the horizontal axis. But you can change that by setting the flex direction property on the container. So you'll get your items going downwards and justify content will center them vertically. The second CSS property is align items, and that controls how the child items flow on the secondary axis. So that's the vertical axis for a Flexbox row layout, or the horizontal axis for a Flexbox column layout. If you apply both of these properties to the parent element and set them both to center, then we'll have our children centered both vertically and horizontally. You don't have to do anything to the children at all. They will just get aligned centrally. We can test this by adding some padding to the parent element, and you can see how this child is perfectly central. This is also nice and responsive, and you can add multiple children back in and they will all align themselves nicely along the center line like this. Here's the resulting CSS for what I've done. Notice how we don't need to add any CSS onto the child elements at all. Because Flexbox is only concerned with the relationship between your parent or your container and the direct children, that means we can actually have multiple levels of Flexbox. So you can have one container with the element that is centered on the middle, and then that child element can also itself act as a Flexbox container for its children. This is how you can use Flexbox to build out an entire web page of boxes inside boxes, which really is the essence of CSS, boxes inside boxes. It's called the box model. So that's centering elements using Flexbox. For more information and for a full reference of all the properties you can use with Flexbox, I put a link in to the MDN web docs in the description below. If you've learned something, then please subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. My name is James Charlesworth and this is the Train to Code YouTube channel.